Hi, it's been a couple of months since I last made a video, so I thought it would be quite good to touch base and let everyone know what's going on in New Zealand at the moment. The Gloriavale movie that I spoke about on my last video has had a really amazing reception here in New Zealand, and it's just started screening in Australia. So if you live in Australia, please Google it, find out what cinemas and which regions it's going to be screening, and go along and have a look. Something that's been happening in New Zealand that most of you who've been watching my videos will know about is that there's an inquiry going on into abuse in care. Initially, it was just going to cover historical abuse of state organisations, but due to outcry about the omission of faith-based organisations and submissions made by survivors and people representing survivors of abuse in faith-based organisations, the inquiry was expanded in scope to include churches and faith organisations. And it was also broad enough to include the Jehovah's Witnesses in it. So last week they had a hearing. The hearings have been going on for a couple of years, but last week's week-long hearing was hearing from institutions giving their responses to, I guess, being accountable for the failings of their church, and acknowledging recognition of those issues that they're responsible for and what they're going to do about it, and any redress. So I guess it was them answering to all the issues that had been raised through the various hearings over the past 2 years. So it was they only dedicated a week to hearing from just a small selection of these faith-based organisations. And the commission, because it had limited time and limited funding from the government, I believe they did try to get the time extended by another couple of years actually, and for more money, but the government said no. So they kind of stuck with what they've got. So they sort of condensed all these organisations down into a representative few, which they included in the public hearing that was live streamed. So I was able to watch quite a lot of it. I didn't see all the groups. Jehovah's Witnesses weren't included in the public hearing, but I was very interested to hear what the Gloriavale leader said, and his lawyer, and also the Catholic Church. We had a horrendous a school called a Catholic school called, no, sorry, it was an Anglican school called Dilworth School, which had some very scandalous child sexual abuse accusations, and mainly the religious, what do they call them in the Anglican Church? They were chaplains. They were chaplains that were working at the school that had many allegations of abuse and proven abuse in the end. So this was a scandal that hit the media in New Zealand, I don't know, a couple of years ago, or it might be longer, that I picked up on it, but terribly scandalous. And so I was interested to hear what they were going to say about it. And of course the Catholic Church too, because I used to be a Catholic, and I found it quite interesting. They during the week they had the Presbyterians, the Methodists, Catholics, Anglicans, and Gloriavale. Yeah. And it was interesting to see the different kinds of responses from these different groups, like the Gloriavale leader and his lawyer seemed to deny that there were any. Well, mind you, the inquiry was looking at historic abuse, so up until the year 2000 or 1999 or something like that. So they were talking about it as if it was a thing in the past, that almost like the abuse doesn't happen anymore, and Gloriavale seemed to think that they had nothing to fix now, that everything was hunky-dory, and that any policies, or they actually blamed it on the culture. They said the culture that led to abuse isn't the culture anymore, which is simply not true if you talk to people who left Gloriavale in very recent times. And it was interesting when I was listening to the Catholic bishop and cardinal, and they had a sister, one of the Sisters of Mercy, speaking for the Catholic Church. I could sense quite a resistance from them towards the helpfulness of the commission. And I was reading an article written by, his name's Dr. Christopher Longhurst, and he's the leader of the SNAP group in New Zealand. And that's for survivors, the Survivors Network of Abuse by Priests. I might not have said that quite right, but something like that. Anyway, he wrote an article about the Catholic Church's policies on handling sexual abuse by priests and the instructions out of Rome. And I found it interesting that he was quoting a bishop in Wellington who, when asked about the child sexual abuse in the church, he said it was a cultural thing. And I noticed that the Gloriavale lawyer, he said that the abuse of the past was a cultural thing. He said it was the effect of the leadership of Neville Cooper, who his other name is Hopeful Christian, and he actually went to jail for sexually violating a child, and after which he went back to the community and resumed his role as leader, which is absolutely appalling that the state allowed that to happen. Anyway, so the lawyer for Gloriavale said it was a culture influenced by the leadership of Hopeful Christian, himself a convicted sex offender, that has led to the sexual offending at Gloriavale. And we have the Catholic bishop saying it's the culture of the Catholic Church that enabled sexual abuse of children to occur. And I take exception to this because it's not just a culture, it's actually written into their doctrines, their instructions for how they govern people's lives in the church. The doctrines govern their behaviour. So the abuse really comes back to the doctrines of the church or the group, and that these are what need to be scrutinized. It's not just a culture. And the Jehovah's Witnesses haven't really said anything like that about, or when they don't come out and really admit that abuse happens so much. Well, they do make statements like, oh, sexual abuse occurs everywhere in society, and they have to deal with it too. But that's about as far as it goes, their admissions about it occurring in the Jehovah's Witness organisation. But yeah, I've never heard them say that the culture of Jehovah's Witnesses has enabled sexual abuse. But what I have heard them say, like at the Australian Royal Commission, when Geoffrey Jackson, who's a governing body member, was on the stand before the commission, he expressed that his role as one of the governing body was as a guardian of doctrine. And it's quite funny, if you take the first letters of those, you get God. Anyway, this was a term that, as a Jehovah's Witness, I'd never heard them use before, guardians of doctrine, and he kind of used it as if it was some kind of title or something, like a superhero title or something. We are guardians of doctrine. And what has struck me really, listening to the Gloriavale lawyer saying that the abuse is a result of the culture and not the doctrine, and the Catholic bishop saying their abuse is a result of culture, not doctrine. It struck me how much these groups are all doing what they can to defend or guard their doctrine. They're all guardians of doctrine. The doctrine to them of their churches is more important than guarding and protecting children. So I just found that was just something I found that was really interesting. And yeah, because we know a lot of their doctrines are actually diametrically opposed to human rights laws that we have come to expect in the 21st century. We expect to be able to have our human rights protected. And their doctrines actually go head to head with those in a lot of cases. When the Gloriavale lawyer was up on the stand in the commission this last week, at the very outset, he stated that the inquiry was not about freedom of religion and not about freedom of association. So there was his signal to say that we're not going to touch doctrines. We're not going to look at doctrines because it's not about doctrines. Freedom of religion permits them to have their religious beliefs of their choice. But the abuse has been a result of the doctrine. So if the commission is going to do its job, it's going to have to look at the doctrine that is hurting people. And it's not just doctrine that can enable sexual abuse of children to happen, also doctrines behind the shunning practice, which devastates far more lives and affects tens of thousands of people in New Zealand. We've got the Jehovah's Witnesses, who number about 14,000. We've got the Christian, the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church, who are about approximately 10,000, and a handful of Scientologists, just a few hundred, and some other smaller churches that all practice stunning. So that's a lot of people whose lives are affected by the doctrine of the supposedly Bible-based doctrine of separation. So if we're going to see any change in the abuse from churches in New Zealand and elsewhere around the world, we're going to have to get the state to actually look at the doctrines. At the moment, it's untouchable because of freedom of religion, but it's not working. It isn't. Religions have been given a free hand to commit all kinds of abuses because of freedom of religion. So it has to have some strings attached to it. They shouldn't be able to just have free rein to disregard the human rights of others. Anyway, I think that's about all I was going to waffle on about today, and hope I've made sense, even though I've sort of stammered and stuttered my way through. But I'll keep you up to date with anything else that happens. Okay, bye.